And so we were basically selling these counterfeit hot cubes on the street in Manhattan of Queens and New York while people were coming out of the subway from work, and it worked. People were buying them by droves. People were like, "Hey, this is $5. I can give these. I can get 4 of these for the price of the other one." Mm-hmm. And so that was the lesson. And then occasionally the cops would come around, the police would come around because this wasn't really legal to be doing this on the street.
Welcome to the podcast Leading Change. I am your host, Adam Christie, and we are continuing our series of speaking to CEOs. You're going to love today's guest, so let's jump right in. Our guest has been a CEO, founder, or early employee of 3 cloud-based software companies. He's an advisor on numerous boards and is one of the most unique and genuine individuals I've ever come across. Please welcome Mahesh Ram. Mahesh, thanks so much for joining us today.
Hey, Adam, it's an absolute pleasure to be on with you. Looking forward to chatting with you and hopefully with your audience as well.
So let's start with young Mahesh, little Mahesh. What was he like? What shaped you? Where did you grow up? And how would you describe your childhood?
Adam, it's really interesting. I had, I think, the great fortune of having a very unique childhood growing up. I was born in India. I was born in a small town in southern India. Well, it's not so small. It's a medium-sized city in southern India called Coimbatore. My parents were both born and raised in India, many generations, and so had the unique opportunity to grow up there and move to the United States right around the time I was about a little past the age of 8 to New York City. Had never been on an airplane, had never been outside the country, complete culture shock. Fortunately, India has a high English standard, so at least I was able to didn't have language barrier, although the ways, the accent, everything was different. I was thrown into urban New York in Queens, New York, one of the boroughs, 5 boroughs of New York, and kind of learned how to be a part of 2 cultures, really. Maintained a lot of my Indian culture. We went back very frequently, spent a lot of time there with my family there in India. So I spent a lot of time in India, still do. But then also became a New Yorker. So my childhood was really, that first phase in India, and then the second phase, being an immigrant, learning how to blend in and into the great melting pot of New York, and then learning how to kind of become an individual in New York, and becoming a child of the subways and a true urban kid is what I was growing up. All the way through high school. Even my high school was far from home, so I took a bus and 2 subways to go to school. It's probably an hour and 20 minutes each way, long distance in Manhattan, on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, fun neighborhoods. So just had, I think, a very special, unique opportunity to kind of be in 2 completely different cultures, as far away from each other as possible, and grow up in both.
Your parents are still there?
No, unfortunately, both my parents have passed. But they were in New York forever. They both never left New York, actually. So I'm the first. I have a younger sister. She's also in New York, so I'm the only one who left New York to come west to California. But we had lots of family also in India, of course. So we would visit grandparents and aunts and uncles almost every year. So,
how would you describe your parents? What were they like?
Yeah, so my the reason we even came to the U.S. was my dad came here to get his MBA at Columbia. He was an engineer at Exxon in India, and he decided that engineering wasn't what he wanted to do with his life, and he decided to apply for an MBA program. And he came to the United States with, I think, $10 in his pocket, and completely, and having to attend school at Columbia. And so he was a pioneer in that sense. We remained behind in India because the visa situation in those days, he had to graduate and get a job. So for a couple of years, we were separated. My mother had an undergraduate degree in India, but then came here and eventually did a master's in nutrition. She became a chief dietitian at a hospital. She was always in the healthcare industry. My dad ended up graduating from Columbia and then ended up going to work for a major publishing company called Doubleday, which later got acquired by a big conglomerate. But most people would know Doubleday, very famous publishing company. And he stayed there for his entire career until retirement. My mom was a dietitian, nutritionist. She got her master's degree after coming to the U.S. and studied, but then went to work and was affiliated with a number of well-known hospitals in the New York area.
So, what early influences or in your education background, what made you want to be an entrepreneur?
I think from an education perspective, I think I was always my parents were pretty traditional. They wanted us to, to be something like a doctor, lawyer, engineer, something very predictable. And for me, that was probably the path I was heading down. I think the interesting experience I had that convinced me at some point that I really wanted to be an entrepreneur was actually was one summer during high school. This is an interesting story. It was around the time that the Rubik's Cube was super hot. The Rubik's Cube was like the hottest toy, and it was selling out in Christmas time and all the times. It was impossible to get, and it was, I don't know, $20 a cube, but it was selling out. So a friend of mine who had some connections downtown in Chinatown had identified a place where they were making knockoff cubes, and we could buy them wholesale for about $1 each. And we were thinking, and they weren't all that great. They were pretty crummy in some respects, but they did the job. And we said, hey, this could be a great business. There's $20 a piece at the department store for the real thing, and people can't even get them. So let's buy a whole bunch of these. So I think we bought 250 of them. And then we trudged as high school students. We put them in a big box, cardboard box, and we trudged to a street corner in New York, in Flushing, New York. And we basically flipped the box over, put a cloth over it, and put the cubes up and said $5 or $10, whatever. I forget what we were charging for the cubes. And so we were basically selling these counterfeit hot cubes on the street in Manhattan, of Queens and New York, while people were coming out of the subway from work. And it worked. People were buying them by droves. People were like, hey, this is $5. I can give these, I can get 4 of these for the price of the other one. Mm-hmm. And so that was the lesson. And then occasionally the cops would come around, the police would come around, because this wasn't really legal to be doing this on the street. And our response was usually we just flip the box over, shovel all the cubes in, and just wait it out, and then go back onto the street. But that was my first foray into entrepreneurship. We started to learn supply and demand, really thinking about unit cost of what you're purchasing, profit margin, in the most practical way possible, and also learned that markets turn. So at some point we had sold a lot of these, and the market was saturated, and people weren't buying anymore. Everybody had seen everybody who needed a cube had one. Mm-hmm. And at one point, somebody came up to us and said, hey, I bought one of your cubes, but I still can't solve it. And by the way, I could solve this thing in 30 seconds at the time. Because we were doing this every day. I mean, you learn how to do these, right? I had somebody show us, but then it turns out there was a book on how to solve the Rubik's Cube. So we said, okay, this is good. People bought the cube, they didn't know how to solve it. So we essentially wrote up a document on how to solve it, and created a nice little cover page, all this on like a printer or a copier, and basically started selling the book instead of the cube. And that kept the business going for another couple of months, because then people were buying the solution more than they were buying the cube. But it was a fun exercise. I think that was where the entrepreneurial thing got its start. I did a bunch of other little things like that in high school after that, because we were thinking, hey, we could make money, because we made a lot of money that summer. And we were like the richest kids in our high school class for a few weeks, at least, until we spent it all.
So you did it the whole summer then?
Yeah, we pretty much. It was about 100 degrees, hot, humid. We had nowhere else to be. We just sat there in the corner and sold cubes for, I don't know, probably at least a month and a half.
And just started it with your friends?
Yeah, it was just me and another friend. It was just an idea that came out of nowhere, but because it's really looking at what people were willing to buy. And I mean, how hot it was, it was just such a demand was so high for it.
Hot counterfeit cubes with Mahesh. I love it. I would have never guessed.